In this video, we're talking about 6 ways to improve your aim for Season 12. It doesn't matter if you're on controller or you're on mouse and keyboard. I'm going to cover tips and tactics for both of these inputs, and all 6 of them have helped me improve tremendously. This video is action-packed. Let's do it. The first tip is recoil patterns. This first step to improving your aim should be a decent understanding of all of the different recoil patterns. I know more seasoned players have this down a bit more than the newer player does, but even for someone like myself, it's really easy to forget certain recoil patterns on weapons, especially the ones I don't use often. And if that weapon doesn't have the helpful attachments that can tone down that recoil, it's really going to be difficult for me to use it. There's really 2 important factors when it comes to Apex recoil. One is that all of the weapons have a predictable recoil pattern. And what this means is that the gun's recoil won't change match to match, but rather when the weapon has no attachments, that's when its recoil will be its most difficult to control. Now, as we level up the weapon with better attachments, the recoil has the same pattern, but it becomes a bit more easier to control. Now, the second important factor is that 2 attachments that assist with recoil control the most are going to be the barrel stabilizers and your standard stocks. Standard stocks actually do the most out of any attachment. They will help with aim drift reduction, they will reload your weapon faster, and they will make it quicker to holster and unholster your weapon. So the easiest way I have learned to control recoil patterns is either go into the firing range and shoot at some of the rocks or the sand, or you can do a quick Google image search, but just make sure that the picture is up to date because some weapons have changed since Apex launched, 3 years ago. Also, for any PC players, make sure you have impact marks turned on so that you can see the bullet patterns when you shoot the rocks or the sand. The second tip I have for you is focus on your target and not your crosshair. I talked about this tip in my last aim video, but I want to elaborate a little bit further this time. And I honestly wouldn't feel right making another aim guide without mentioning this tactic because I believe it to be super important. And I know there's always going to be new viewers who haven't heard this one before. So obviously in Apex, movement plays a huge role, and certain players utilize movement to their maximum potential. And this is why when you are in engagements, it's important to focus on the target more than your crosshair. This tip centers around hand-eye coordination, and it's critical to be able to react to what your opponents are doing during these fast-paced engagements, specifically like when they strafe left to right, or they do a redirect, or potentially even a tap strafe. Now, I find this tip helpful in a lot of close-range fights too, especially with single-fire guns like shotguns or the wingman. See, when you're in a shotgun fight and an opponent is strafing left to right and then right to left, it's 10 times easier to connect on your shots if you just follow their movement and then track accordingly. This also will work with hip-fire sprays of automatic weapons like SMGs or assault rifles. The closer an opponent is to you, the less you have to lead your shots in this game. The further out they are, the more you're going to have to lead those shots. Now, this is important while you gauge what your opponent is actively doing and what weapons you are using during those fights. The third tactic we got to talk about is hip firing versus aiming down your sights. Simply put, the difference here is when you aim down your sights in Apex, you will have a slower movement speed in a trade-off for a tighter bullet spread. If you hip fire, you have a faster strafe speed depending on what weapon class you're using, but the bullet spread could be wider and the recoil pattern could be a bit different from the ADS fire. This is contingent on which gun you're using and how far away you are to your target when you're hip firing, but a good rule of thumb is hip fire if an opponent is less than 5 to 10 feet in front of you. There's always going to be exceptions to this due to the different weapons and the different situations that Apex has, but for automatic guns specifically, really try to get accustomed to hip firing those guns if your opponents are close to you. You will be surprised at how efficient they are. Now, the fourth tactic centers around this philosophy that I have about your movement and your aim. It basically boils down to this: more movement equals taking less damage. Less movement equals focus on your elimination. See, when players overdo the movement techniques in Apex, it inadvertently makes their aim less accurate. So when I say more movement equals taking less damage, that would be most common in an engagement where you are low and your opponent is low, but it's going to be a close one. Therefore, if you can combine your movement and your aim, you should get the kill. It really has hundreds of variables to factor in due to every detail that could be going on in a fight. But this is just the simplest way I've learned to break it down for you all. Less movement should be reserved for when an opponent is already low and you just need to deal like 50 damage or less to them to kill them. See, in these scenarios, just simply focus on your target and hitting those last few shots to get the job done. Your movement plays less of a role in those situations, and I see players stumble on this all the time. A couple of bad habits I have to point out, because I am talking about movement and I'm talking about your aim here, and you guys know I coach players over on Fiverr, so I see a lot of these issues that do reoccur in many different players in a lot of different elos. So two of them are this: jumping a lot in fights. You've got to tone that down. See, when you jump in a fight all the time, you make it really hard for you to hit your shots, but you make it easier for your opponent to just shoot you while you jump. Occasionally, there will be moments where this unpredictable movement pays off, but if you're doing it in just about every single close range engagement, you've got to tune it down. The other bad habit is getting stuck crouching, or you're crouching too much, like you're crouch spamming. I know crouch spamming is a term often used, and it is a helpful technique, but if you spam it too much, it can actually have the opposite effect on you. Newer players tend to get stuck crouching as they learn this crouch spam technique. Now, I know I've said it before and I'll say it again, like crouch spamming is not the word I want to use. It's more about like a crouch strafe. You do want to crouch and you want to come back up and you want to repeat that. But if your pace is way too fast, it won't work out how you think it will. The fifth tactic to implement into your game is start a warm-up routine or an aim trainer or both. See, I think warming up in Apex is truly a slept-on tactic to improve your aim and your recoil control. I've got in the habit of doing it every single time I hop on Apex. I spend anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes warming up in the firing range, and here's what I do. I grab a weapon that I'm most commonly going to use in game, like a Mozambique and a Sentinel. I'm just kidding. Like an R301, a flatline, a hemlock, any gun that you use, it really doesn't matter. You use the gun with no attachments. You stand close to the dummies, but not within hip firing range. You just want to stand on the platforms. You start one clipping the dummies. Get used to how the gun feels with no attachments. This is basically to mock the scenario when you drop into an Apex game. You're not going to have a fully kitted gun, and even if you go and play arenas, your weapon won't be fully kitted in the first round or two. If you can start to get comfortable with how the gun feels with no attachments, as you continue one clipping these dummies, create more space and add more attachments, but do it up in a leveling up process. Don't just go from using the gun with no attachments to all purple attachments. I do the drill at multiple different meter lengths, so I'll do it at like 10 to 20 meters out, and then I'll get close and I'll be in that 5 meter hip fire range, and then I'll go all the way back and do like 80 meters out. The better you can control the gun at a further distance, the easier it will start to feel as you get closer. And as I'm sure a lot of you know, in Apex, a lot of fights do end up close range. The sixth tip we got to talk about is your sensitivity and your settings. Now, finding the right settings and sensitivity is crucial to being able to improve your aim, but ultimately make you feel more comfortable during fights. If you're new, you may want to change some things around because Apex puts you on some pretty wonky settings originally. So for my controller players, let's talk about settings and sensitivities. Now, this will vary depending on how you play controller and if you use paddles or not. However, I don't play claw and I don't use paddles. I just hold the controller normally. I have my stick layout to button puncher, and I have crouch on toggle, not hold. My sensitivity is 4-4. This is a moderately slow sense, but I don't think it's too sluggish. Sensitivity is a total preference in Apex, so don't think you have to use my sense or even your favorite content creators. And I know ALC videos come off like they're the next big thing, but I can tell you from my experience with coaching players, it's not always the best option. I see more players struggle while on ALC than I do see players using it successfully. Now, ALC can make some things more finely tuned, but it can also minimize your aim assist. I often see players having a sensitivity that's way too fast for controller, at least in my eyes. And this is just my opinion, guys. It's backed up with my experience and the data that I've seen, but I do understand some players use ALC and it does work for them. So make sure to just figure it out for yourself and test different options. As far as your field of view goes, this is really important for everybody listening. Make sure that you change this to at least 100 or above. Apex puts you on 70 field of view. With a higher field of view, you will be able to see things better. You will have more of a zoomed out perspective. You will be able to see enemies on your left, your right, above you, below you. And this will help you be able to react to their movement once you get closer to them. For my mouse and keyboard friends, let's talk about your sensitivity. Now, like I said, I don't play on mouse and key, but I have a bunch of friends who do, and I talked to them before making this video. So here's what they said. There's no objectively best sensitivity out there, but this doesn't mean there's a good range of sensitivities that you probably want to be in. Typically, the most common DPI settings on mice are either 400, 800, and 1600. But be sure to understand that DPI and your in-game sensitivity are two separate things. So my friend said if you're going to use the 800 DPI, the range you want to be in for an in-game sensitivity is anywhere from 1.2 to 2.0. 2.0 is obviously going to be on the higher end, and 1.2 is going to be on the lower end. Now, obviously, other factors like mouse space, desk space may influence your preference here. But I have also coached a ton of mouse and keyboard players who are playing on a way too high of a DPI to their sensitivity in game. So maybe double check your settings if things are feeling really off. Now, the last thing I have to say about sensitivity is if you're changing it often and you don't give yourself enough time to adapt to it, you will run into issues. I think the best practice is give yourself a few days at least once you try a new sensitivity out. You must have changed for a reason, so try it out and get a good sample size. Don't get into the habit of changing it every week or every day though. This will and does stunt a lot of players' growth in my opinion. They're always trying to change up their sensitivity because it's the next big thing that they see on YouTube, and that's just not the case. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you'll consider subscribing so you don't miss out on my next upload. If anyone's interested in Apex Legends coaching, the Fiverr link in the description has got you covered. I'll catch you guys on my next upload. Peace.